The first section we'll be covering is called Quickly Create a Conversion Workflow. I'll paste the link into the chat there. Keep in mind you will have to be logged in to the FME Academy to access these sections of the course and to do the quizzes. I believe everyone that attended yesterday was able to get logged in okay, but if you are having any issues getting access to the content, logging into the Academy, please just let us know in the chat and we'd be happy to help. So for this first section, we're going to be looking at a slightly different way to get started with building a workspace. Yesterday, we started from scratch using the blank workspace option when we started FME Workbench. So that starts with a blank canvas, and we added our readers and writers manually and connected them up. That is a completely valid way to start and works in many cases. But we also have another option, which is a tool called Generate Workspace. And that lets you fill in the data that you have, so the format and location for that data, and then specify the data you want, so what format and where you'd like to write it, and it will automatically create a workspace to do that for you. This method has a few benefits, which we'll see when we go through this process, and makes it a little bit easier sometimes to get started. So we do sometimes recommend getting used to using Generate Workspace. It is a pretty good way to quickly start your conversion workflow, particularly if you already have an idea of what data you're starting with and what data you want. So I'll go ahead and share my lab so that we can start to look at how Generate Workspace functions. I did try to change how I'm displaying my lab today. So let me know if that looks any better. It seems to have resized once for some reason, but it should be a little bit bigger than yesterday. I know we had some issues yesterday where, unfortunately, the lab view when I was sharing it was a little hard to see. It's a long story, but basically just is a Strigo problem that we've been trying to work around. Okay, Patrick says it looks okay. So yeah, hopefully everyone can read that all right and the quality stays okay. Let me know if anything's unclear. I can try to zoom in a little bit, maybe more on the canvas today. That might help. And Manadeep's asking about recordings. We do have recording from yesterday. We will send that out. I'll try to send out maybe 1 and 2 by the end of the day today, just to kind of keep everybody up to date. Those won't be edited, so there'll be all the gaps for breaks and things. And we will edit those after the course is concluded and upload them to the Academy when we get around to it. All right, so what I'll do now is just walk us through this quickly create a conversion workflow section. We're going to be using a slightly different character today. This is Jennifer we'll be working with. She's a GIS specialist in local government. And we're going to recreate the workspace we had yesterday in most regards. It'll be very similar. One of the differences, though, is we're going to read from a database to show you how that works. So we'll be reading from a PostGIS database, which is a spatial implementation of Postgres. And then we'll be writing it to an Esri geodatabase. The goal here is to eventually have that geodatabase be served to the public so they can access it. So we'll also have to make some changes to the schema because we'd like a slightly different schema available for the public-facing data set. So knowing, what she has and what she wants, it makes sense to use Generate Workspace here. So I'll go ahead and click the Generate Workspace button. You can click yes or no on these prompts. It doesn't really matter once you get to your lab. And as a reminder, those labs for you will probably still be starting, and they should be available by the time I'm done demonstrating. But let us know if you don't have any access to those labs. So I've clicked Generate Workspace. It opens up a dialog here, which is probably going to look pretty familiar to you because it is basically just a reader or add reader and add writer dialog combined. The top part being the reader and the middle part being the writer, and there's a special different part at the bottom for generate. So because I already know the format, I'm going to type in PostGIS and select that as my format. And one thing to note, you'll see when you select a database format, and this applies to web connection formats as well, the dataset prompt actually changes to say connection. And it's no longer asking for a file path or a URL. It's now asking for a web connection or database connection. And those are basically objects created within FME Workbench that store encrypted credentials to access databases or web connections. And the nice thing about them is you can then share them among other FME users. So you can basically have one person who's maintaining the credentials. They're the only one that needs to know the credentials, but then they can share that file, that connection file, with other users, either locally on maybe a network drive or something like that, or a shared computer, or they can share it via FME Flow as well and set up permissions about who can access it. So it's just a pretty good practice to sort of divorce the credentials and ownership of a connection from having to, enter a plain text password or something like that. On these machines, we actually already have the connection set up. So you can see this first one here, FME Training PostGIS Database. We've already set up a web connection. So you can just select that when you're working through this exercise. You don't have to create a new one. If you wanted to see what it looks like, you can click on Add Database Connection. It's really straightforward. You're just entering basically the host and username and password. And you can see what one that's filled out looks like in the instructions if you want. But like I said, you don't need to create a new one. And in fact, you can't create a new one with the same name. So I'd recommend just selecting the one that's already there. And that will let us connect to that database. You'll see the parameters button has a little exclamation mark. So I'll click that. And the reason is we do need to specify a table. FME by default won't read an entire database, which is probably a good idea. So to specify a table, I'll click the ellipses button. This will query the database to load a list of schemas. So we want the public schema. And then I will choose I went past it, the business owners table by checking next to business owners. So that's the same data set we used yesterday. It is slightly different. We'll see there's a small difference later on, but it's pretty much the same data. So I'll click OK. And now we're reading this in. One thing that will be helpful to note, there's a where clause field on a lot of our database formats. So you can actually put in an SQL where clause there, which will restrict how much of the data you read. And generally we say, let the database do the work when you're working with FME, because databases tend to be faster than reading everything in and then filtering it once it's in a workspace. So this is a great place to do that. If you knew already in advance you only wanted a subset of this data, you could use a where clause to only read in that data. And we also have the SQL creator and SQL executor transformers you can use to write entire SQL statements to read in data. And those can also be quite performant as well when you are reading large data sets from a database. All right, so we've got the top part configured here. Because this is already a spatial data format, we don't need to specify the coordinate system. It'll just be read from source. And then just like yesterday, we're going to set up an Esri GeoDatabase Open API writer. Remember, you have to use the Open API one because the other ones require licensing, which we don't have on these machines. So make sure you pick the correct one there. And then we have to specify where we'd like to write it. So I'll click the ellipses button to browse. And I'm going to put this on the C drive in FME data in the same place we were working yesterday. Sorry, my lab's just being a bit sluggish here. Okay, well, there we go. Sorry, I just took a moment to think about that. So I'm going in the same folder we used yesterday. That's FME data output training. And we can call this one business owners.gdb. And again, just like yesterday, that geodatabase doesn't exist yet, and that's fine. We can just type in the name and FME will create it for us with the writer. And then just like yesterday as well, we'll go to the parameters on the writer and we'll check overwrite existing geodatabase because we don't want to be appending every time we run. We'd like to overwrite the entire geodatabase each time we run it. So I'll click OK there after checking that. And then this section at the bottom is more advanced, so we're not going to get into that. We're just going to keep it on the default, which is static schema. And we will click OK. And now what FME will do is generate a workspace to automatically write from that between those two different locations, or read and then write. However, the interesting thing that happens is we have this new object in the middle. You might have just expected only to have feature types on the canvas, but we have this blue object called the geometry filter in the middle. These blue objects are called transformers, and they let you change your data in some way, restructure it, calculate new values, enrich it, join it, whatever you want to do, validate it. All kinds of different things you can do with these transformers. And FME has actually automatically added one here. And the reason it did that is because one of the advantages of Generate Workspace is FME uses the information it knows about these different formats to try to ensure that your workspace will run without any problems. And this is one of the advantages of using a tool like FME over some of these conversion tools that don't really know actually that much about the formats they're working with. They just kind of do the as bare minimum a conversion as they can do. In this case, FME knows that PostGIS databases can have mixed geometry types in a single feature type. So you could have points and polygons mixed or something like that. But it also knows that Esri geodatabases can only have one geometry type per feature class. And so that's why it used a geometry filter and separated out any incoming features from PostGIS into their corresponding geometry types. And then it matched those up with the geometry types that are available in an Esri geodatabase, because you can see FME is capable of filtering quite a few different kinds of geometry, but there's actually only 4 different kinds present in a geodatabase. So it automatically put in a filter and sent those to different feature types based on the geometry type. And that will ensure that that data can be written regardless of what our source data in the PostGIS database is. Now, in this specific case, we don't actually need all of these because we would assume that all we have is points, right? Because like we worked with yesterday, these are just point locations of businesses. We would expect that's probably the only feature type that will receive any information. But we'll see how that works in a minute. The other advantage of using Generate Workspace is if we look at the schema on these, we can see that FME will automatically try to make sure that the attribute names are valid in the destination format. And I don't think it actually had to change anything here, did it? Let's see. No, these are all the same. But generally, FME will make changes to attribute names if they're required. Things like a limited number of characters, it'll truncate them. All uppercase or lowercase, no special characters, all those kinds of restrictions that are present on different formats, it will try to honor those when you use Generate Workspace, and you don't really have to usually worry about it. And so that's another advantage of using Generate Workspace. We'll have a look at this schema in more detail later on. But we've seen how this works basically. Let's go ahead and save and then run our workspace. Just like yesterday, it doesn't really matter where you save these. Their machines get deleted at the end of the day. So I'll click run. Again, I'm just prompted to confirm these sources of where I'd like my data to be. I'll keep what I have and click run. So now what's happening is we are reading data from that PostGIS database and caching it. And the geometry filter is filtering data by geometry type and then writing it out to a new geodatabase. We can just confirm that geodatabase exists now that it's successfully run. I should double check it's run. Yeah, successful in my log. I'll find one of my feature types and click the open containing folder button just to confirm that this geodatabase was written. There it is. So you can see using Generate Workspace gets you to the point where you can write your data quite quickly. And so now we have businessowners.gdb ready to go in short order. So there are a few other things going on. We'll notice actually there were some null features here, features without geometry, which is different from yesterday. So that's something to pay attention to. We'll have to deal with that. And we do have some things we want to work on because I mentioned Jennifer wants a different schema on the destination data. So we'll do that in the next couple exercises. But for this one, go ahead and use Generate Workspace to create this setup here. Following the instructions on the lesson. And then, yeah, and then you can complete the quiz and we'll continue. So let me see, do we have any questions here? Expect the surface filter to be linked to a polygon feature class. Why is it linked to the line feature class? Right, so FME's made the decision to match up surface to line instead of to area. I'm trying to think of why that might be the case. I would guess that would be because, well, no, you think if there's topology, then polygons should be able to share line segments as well. That was what I was wondering, if maybe it's because they'd have to be contiguous. I'm not actually sure why FME did that per se. What we might want to do is have a look at the FME geometry model in the docs. So I will share this link here. Oh wait, this is for an old version of FME. Let me find the new one. There's quite a helpful section in the docs about geometry. Yeah, 3D contour, treating it like a mesh. Yeah, those are all good ideas. I'm not actually sure, Ryan might know, if you can figure out the correspondence of FME geometry types to format geometry types in the format help. I guess I could have a quick look and see if it shows up here. This is, you can see the writer parameters help from opening up a feature type. We could have a look in here. And then the other place to look would be that geometry model, just if you want to understand how FME treats geometry, you can browse the docs for that. I'll have a look at this while you all work on that exercise and see if we can figure out exactly why it's doing that. But that's basically, I think, on the right track, probably treating it as a mesh. So yeah, go ahead and work on that first exercise and do the quiz. As yesterday, will be available to help. So please just use that lab assistance button or ask a question in the chat if you need any help. And I'll give you all about 10 minutes to work on that. See you in a bit.